Hey guys, this is Ed.
And I'm Z.
So we're doing a deck tech?
Yeah, so we're doing something a little bit different today. I know since D&D Forgotten Realms, I have been promising, kind of a showcase of that commander deck. Well, here's the day. Basically, we've got a commander deck built here. We're going to kind of break it down, take you through different parts of how we kind of constructed the deck. And then ultimately, it's going to be one of those instances where at the end, you'll kind of be able to kind of see how you feel about it. This did go through a little bit of play testing, so the deck is actually somewhat refined. It's never going to be the highest power level thing I could throw out there, but it's fun. It plays around a casual table pretty well, and at the end of the day, if you think you can do better, definitely throw it in the description below.
Yeah.
That way we can kind of see what you came up with and see if maybe we missed something in our deck building process.
And I have played against this deck before it got to this point, and it was actually pretty fun to play against. It definitely was not the most strongest deck at the table. One of our friends had the strongest.
He always has the strongest deck at the table because he can throw the cards at it. But it's one of those. It did a very fun job playing the political game, and so we're kind of excited to see what we do. Was there anything else you wanted to add here?
No, I'm curious to see because I haven't seen the deck since the playtest. So I'm curious really to see what Z has put into this deck to up it.
Fair enough. Well, every good journey, every good D&D story starts with the party coming together, the party being recruited. So what we're going to do here is we're going to show you who recruited them, and we're going to show you the party list. So that way, you know who's in this group.
So let's start the journey. Alright guys, so I'm going to let Z's going to do most of the talking because it is his deck and he's going to tell us a story about this.
Yeah, and he'll be jumping in from time to time to kind of give his thoughts or opinions. But the way I figured we showcase this, let's start with who gets the party together, and then we'll showcase the heroes. Starting off with, we've got to gather everyone together, and who better to do that than Tazri, Beacon of Unity. He's the party commander from the most recent Zendikar block, and what he says is, for 4 and a white, he's a legendary creature, human warrior. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. Just as a reminder, in case you didn't know, party contains cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard. Warrior is the Magic the Gathering edition of fighter. So those are your 4 traditional D&D party roles. Who better to get the party together? And his other ability, is he can pay 2 in a blue, 2 in a black, 2 in a red, or 2 in a green. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 cleric, rogue, warrior, wizard, and or ally cards from among them and put them into your hand. The rest go into the bottom of your library in a random order. So we're only running 1 of each because we want the heroes to be special, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, he's going to find your heroes from the deck. And then what we'll do is let's start over here with our cleric. The cleric is normally your spiritual center of the group, so we'll kind of work with that. We went with Joffrey Ghostforge here, the dwarf cleric from Strixhaven. He's 3 in Boros. Spirits you control get 1/1 and have trample and haste. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you'll exile it. And if you do, you get to create a copy of that creature, which is a spirit in addition to its other types. With the exception of when it leaves the battlefield, it returns the exile card to its owner's graveyard. So that way, if you stole a creature, it's not going to just go into your yard. And every good adventurer's got to have their equipment. So in this case, they've got some adventuring gear, which is just highly appropriate.
Adventuring gear?
Yep. And it's going to just play off kind of the land and everything else. But you've got to have adventuring gear to go adventuring. And angelic armaments. In this case, their hammer and their shield. And it's going to give them just enough of a pump and protect them. And then we have some signature abilities for the cleric. In this case, Divine Gambit, praying to their god and getting helped out for their effort.
So that would be your God Call.
That would be like you channeling magic from your divinity, yeah. And then Resurrection, because who's going to bring you back to life? Well, it's going to be the cleric. They're the built-in defibrillator.
Bit.
So, that's going to be our cleric here. As for our rogue in the party, we went with Edric, Spymaster of Trest. He's the elf rogue. It says when a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller draws a card. So it also plays a little bit of a sub-game of letting us draw some cards, which in Commander is a pretty big deal. And as for the rogue, because they're not so magically inclined, they tend to have a little bit more equipment.
Yeah.
And so they've got the Whisper Silk Cloak, their cloak to kind of hide out. It says it can't be blocked and gives it Shroud, so it's a good way to protect itself. We have the Dueling Rapier, which you've got to have a weapon to fight in the dungeon, so it's going to help you out there. And Rogue's Gloves, because what kind of rogue would leave their gloves at home? And basically, it's another, when it deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card.
Yeah, because you can't leave those fingerprints around.
Exactly. As for the rogue here, they've got some abilities. While I don't own a sneak attack, that would have been appropriate here. Instead, we kind of went with some other abilities that play much like a sneak attack in the form of Go for the Throat, a vulnerable spot in the body, and Murderous Cut, because the rogue really just wants to kill you.
He wants to get you out in one swing and move on.
So that'll kind of take it from this section, and in just a moment we're going to flip you over to the other two heroes. Now we get to the rest of our adventuring band, and we'll start off over here with our wizard. Here we chose to go with Linvala, Shield of Seagate, who, by her own, will be able to protect the party with her ability to sacrifice herself. Yeah, in case you didn't know, she was an angel wizard in the set, so she does get that tribal synergy. And at the beginning of your combat on your turn, if you control a full party, you can choose a non-land permanent an opponent controls, and until the end of your turn, it can attack or block, and activated abilities can't be activated. So it's just a little bit of supplemental benefit if the party is all working together to fight something.
Nice.
But, like every good wizard, you can't leave home without your staff. So in this case, we have the Skyblinder staff, which gives it +1/+0 and can't be blocked by creatures with flying. Since our wizard flies, it's a little bit of nice advantage. On the flip side, you'd never want to leave home without some kind of gear to protect yourself, so we've got the Robe of Stars, which gives a passive +0/+3, but you can also activate its astral projection and phase itself out for a little bit, just to help protect the wizard.
So it's not on the field anymore when it phases out.
Kind of, yeah. You just treat it like it doesn't exist. As for some abilities, or in this case, spells, we have Tasha's Hideous Laughter. See, he's already gotten afflicted with it. Basically, we kind of went with some signature spells here. Tasha's Hideous Laughter was one of the signature spells for the wizard in this edition. And then, who can forget the tried and true Fireball?
Fireball!
Originally, we had Power Word Kill in here, but we decided Fireball just felt a little bit more thematic and a little bit more appropriate. So, we decided to go back to the tried and true. That said, now we move over to our last and final associate here, and that would be Akiri, the Fearless Voyager. Now, if you're familiar with the partner was a soldier. Here, Akiri is a warrior, so it fits what we want to do. And it says, whenever you attack a player with one or more equipped creatures, draw a card. Well, I think all of our adventuring party should be equipped, so he's going to help us be knowledgeable to protect ourselves. On top of that, he's going to grant us some additional protection for removing those equipment if it comes down to it. So, that's nice. As the fighter in the party, we want to make sure he's properly equipped. So, we've got a Prowler's Helm, because you never leave home without your helmet.
Nope.
And it's going to make it harder for him to be blocked. He's got himself some plate armor, because again, if you get hit, you want to make sure you're still standing to protect the rest of your party. And then, let's not forget, he's one of the heroes of this tale. So let's give him the hero's blade.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was reading the hero's blade, because I think I have it.
Yeah, so it's basically a nice little pump, and whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield, you can auto-equip it for free.
Ooh, nice. It's fitting. Fitting's blade.
And going back to our 5th edition fighters here, they get the various battle masteries if you go battle master fighter.
Ooh.
So to kind of represent that, we went with Defiant Strike, which here we've got the showcase / Strixhaven Mystical Archive art, and we went with Valorous Stance. Both of which are going to make your creature just a little bit, more flexible in what they want to do. Defiant Strike will give it +1/+0 until end of turn and draw you a card. Just a kind of cantrip, but it lets you get ahead in combat if needed. And Valorous Stance is going to destroy a large toughness creature, or it's going to let you be protected in case things do come up.
Which fighters do need protection, even though they are the tanks.
Yeah, sometimes you can't survive rocks falling, though. So
no.
So, now that we've seen the heroes of our tale, let's see who they'll be going up against. Alrighty, and so now that we've got our heroes out of the way, let's look at our villains. We'll kind of start off, this top row is our big bad, so to speak. And that's going to be Tiamat and her brood, as well as Lolth over here. That way you have 2 big bads to fight, so it's not just a single adventure and campaign. You can have a couple down the road. And so for the 5 dragons we decided to put for Tiamat's brood, we just went with the traditional white, blue, black, red, and green dragons.
Which you normally do encounter at least one of those in your adventures.
Yeah, so having a dragon in there, it's just D&D. It wouldn't be Dungeons & Dragons without the dragons.
Yeah.
Lolth being one of our signature, evil species gods and, same time, well-known Underdark Lord, we wanted to make sure she got some spotlight too. Then we went to the general mean McNasties that you'll find running throughout the adventure. So we started off with goblins, which we've got a goblin javeliner here. We then went to kobolds. So we've got Minion of the Mighty, who, coincidentally, might be worshipping Tiamat and helping try to further her force. We've got the lovely little Blink Dog, who likes to kind of just teleport. We've got the Drider, who, again, has sworn themselves to Lolth here, so, we wanted to keep it appropriate. We have the Displacer Beast, which, kind of like the Blink Dog, wants to poof and appear other places.
Cause damage and then disappear.
We have one of my favorite tried and true D&D monsters, the Rust Monster. Just a mean little nasty thing for the fighter to run into, especially when it eats his armor. So, maybe we make use of that fighter's armor and try to make it a little bit more powerful. Sometimes you're wandering nature and you encounter things in the wild. So to represent that, we've got the Neverwinter Dryad. Oozes are pretty common. So, here we've got the Ochre Jelly, as well as a fan favorite, Gelatinous Cube, down there at the bottom.
Nasty.
We also have a Clay Golem, because, at the end of the day, these wizards have to make something to protect their labs, and it doesn't always work out well for a party.
Yeah.
Sometimes nature decides it's just not having you, and, the bullet decides to, try to eat you or some cattle or some other livestock. So that's a thing. We kind of have over here a Death Priest, because sometimes you just got to have a religious cult. And then another signature creature of the Underdark, the Mind Flayer. Because sometimes you just need to take control
of the other player's mind.
So, this is kind of an initial spotlight, but, there's not just the mean nasties in the dungeon. Sometimes you have other threats to worry about.
Well, I like this because it really just does suit D&D. It just streams D&D. You got dragons, Tiamat herself, or is it him?
I believe it's herself.
I've never gone to lift up her tail.
I think you would be roasted before you ever got that opportunity. But at the same time, we did kind of want to showcase the D&D vibes while still allowing the deck to function. Otherwise, I could fit 100 non-land cards in here that all represent D&D well. But we wanted to make the deck functional as well.
And I think this deck does, because like you said, Jocelyn's Cube, kobolds, goblins, those are just things you expect in a D&D campaign. You expect to kill goblins on the first day out or the second day out. You expect to encounter a Jocelyn's Cube at one point.
Yeah.
Your favorite, the Rust Monster. Every fighter's bane.
Definitely one of them. We didn't have the doppelganger in the set that I could use, at least that I noticed, to really mess with people. But there's some other fun things. Speaking of, quote, fun things, let's take a look at some of the other hazards our party may. So here we have some of the perils of the dungeon. We've got the obvious and even not so obvious. So here we decided this is our traps. We've got Ravenous Trap to exile those cards out of that pesky player's graveyard. The Ricochet Trap to kind of redirect something around. The Spiked Pit Trap, because that's always a fun thing to fall into.
Oh, yes.
Then we have the two not-so-suspected traps. We've got the tried and true D&D monster. We call that a mimic. And, that lovely little treasure chest you found, hopefully it doesn't have teeth.
And takes your hand off.
Yep. But then we also have this beautiful sphere standing on on like a podium, and when you touch it, you just kind of cease to be, because that's a sphere of annihilation. So, the dungeon has many more perils than just the actual monsters.
Yeah, these are the two that your DM usually throws at you when you kind of piss them off.
And that's part of why they're the not-so-subtle traps. They're the ones that are like, they exist, but it's the ones your group is not suspecting. Because, having something like a spiked pit trap, okay, that makes sense. Or having other types of traps.
Yeah.
But no one really expects the sphere of annihilation unless you know your DM hates you. And for the most part, nobody suspects a mimic. This isn't Dark Souls where the chain goes one way. So,
well, mimics are always fun because my ODM used to love to throw them in after we just had this big epic battle that took 2 game sessions to finish. Because we had 15 people. We're going to go loot. Yeah, cool. The fighters are not even prepared. They have their swords put away. They have their shields on their back. Open the treasure chest. Treasure chest jumps at them and tries to eat their head. Roll initiative.
So, these are always fun ways to throw players off guard. But through all the trials and tribulations, there's got to be some kind of payoff to it, right? Some kind of loot?
Treasure, maybe?
Well, let's see what that is. So, like I said, every adventure's got loot. Never said it was always the good kind of loot, but we'll kind of cover a little bit of both here. So, I know generally in my adventuring parties, we always love it when we find things like a bag of holding, or just in general, a treasure chest. A dungeon map will always kind of help you find your way through. Ebony Fly, just a nice little, sweet little magical item. Bucknard's Everfull Purse. Seems like that might be a fun little, magical item to play around with. And, we figured each side needed some kind of artifact to solidify who they were. So for the heroes, we gave them the Black Staff of Waterdeep. Because, sometimes that wizard needs to get an upgrade.
Yep.
However, for all the good in the world, there is still some bad. In this case, the villains get 2 specific pieces of treasure that the heroes are able to pillage from them. And that would be the Eye of Vecna, because that's always a pleasant thing to invoke into existence.
Vecna himself.
And then a cursed mirror, because, mirror, mirror on the wall. Who got dragged through it this time?
Nice.
So, that's kind of our treasure path we decided to go along with here. And for the most part, it's going to help the deck function. Generates mana, turns these artifacts that wouldn't be used for anything into more significant kind of aspects of the deck. Gives some card advantage, gives some mana. So it's ultimately all a matter of helping the deck function while still being on flavor.
Yeah, and there's a lot of flavor in this deck.
But I know for every D&D adventure, there's always different scenarios to pop up or different encounters. Let's talk about some of the scenarios you might run into. So, much like we were just talking about, various scenarios may occur. So in this, we've kind of set up a little bit of a timeline of, a traditional D&D campaign that could occur. So in this case, the party will meet up in a tavern. Then on the way to go complete their quest, they might get ambushed on the road. At which point the party, in their infinite wisdom, decides to split the party. And some may find a cursed idol, and some may find some prisoners. Well, when the party comes back together, they're on the way to the villain's lair. They might run across a pair of goblins and have to make some decisions. And then finally, last but least, setting up for the big bad's encounter, you'll find the villain's lair. So these are just a couple of scenarios that we put in the deck to kind of showcase, hey, we want the deck to have that D&D feel of the various encounters throughout, but to tell a story as well. And these cards do a very good job of being able to be swapped around in orders to still tell a different story. So we felt these were the ones we kind of wanted to go with here in order to showcase the opportunities a little bit better.
So next we're going to different locations?
Yeah, obviously you have to have somewhere for these adventures to occur. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you some real estate and go over the lands. All right, and so last we had the land base. For our basic lands, we try to keep it pretty simple. We actually had a pretty even spread for the most part of color diversity. So we were a little bit heavier on white than the rest of the colors. So what we did was we went ahead and went with 6 plains, 5 mountains, 5 islands, 5 swamps. For the most part, they were about 15 mana pips, with one of them being 14. And then our splash color was actually green. So we got 4 basic greens. And so as for our filtering, we still wanted the mana base to be on theme or appropriate for this deck. So what we decided to go with is we went through areas you could realistically see a D&D party traveling through, whether that would be a crumbling necropolis, an opulent palace, a monastery of monks. So we went with the Mystic Monastery, the Sandstep Citadel of a warlord, an arcane sanctum for wizardry, Drungle's Shrine for an ancient civilization, Frontier Bivouac.
That's a weird name.
A Savage Lands Nomadic Outpost, or Seaside Citadel. So that's kind of where our tri-lands came into play. That's why we picked those over other options that might have been more gameplay efficient. We specifically decided we wanted the land base to stay on theme too. It's also part of why we went with these lovely Adventures of the Forgotten Realm flavor text lands that have the quest logs in them. And we made sure to include every one of the different ones. So even at the forest, we've only got 4 forests, but those 4 forests all have the 4 different quest lines.
Yeah, I like the lands from the Forgotten Realms just because of the flavor text.
Yeah, it's so on brand. I wanted to make sure we spotlighted that here. As for our final 2 land slots, though, because we run a total of 37 lands, and while our tri-lands are going to take up 10 of those, and our other lands are going to take up the remaining slots, we did want to make sure we spotlighted the 2. which would be the command tower, i.e. our villain's lair, with all of its lightning and terror goodness. And then, what are we all doing this for if not the treasure? So we decided to include the treasure vault.
Because you gotta mention to that treasure vault at one point.
We all got to get there somehow. So that's kind of how we decided to build this deck. But again, everyone's going to have their own different twist on it. I know a lot of people have been building cubes out of their D&D stuff. So what we'd like to do is we're going to pass it back over to y'all. How do y'all think about this deck? What do y'all think we should change? Anything we should add, subtract? I did want to mention before we get too far into it, as it comes down to it, we specifically chose the heroes we did because we didn't want to just go, here's Forgotten Realms. We're building an entire thing out of Forgotten Realms. We decided we wanted to spotlight a little bit of everything because Zendikar at its heart was the D&D party adventure set. That was the whole inspiration for the allies mechanic. So if we didn't give them some love, if we didn't throw back to them, then I felt like we weren't doing it right. And that's also why we tried to limit the number of legendary creatures in this deck. While we could have went for other options, what we tried to focus on was, unless it was a boss, i.e. Tiamat or Lolth, or the adventuring party or the hirer themselves, we didn't want a single legendary creature in the deck. Artifacts, in this case, legendary artifacts, we kind of went one per side, one for good, one for evil. So we did try to balance it out a little bit and keep that limit in mind when building. But for the most part, that I think we got a very fun turnout here. I know one of I've got a couple of deck techs like this in the works of what I'd like to get filmed. But tell us what you think. And at the end of the day, everyone's going to build their own way. Everyone's got their own personalized brews. This one was much more a thematical experience than a traditional Magic deck. So I wanted to make sure that we kind of walked through all the lore. If we do a normal game or a normal deck tech, we may break down a little bit more on how the deck is meant to work and operate and kind of the various engines to allow it to play. Or we may kind of showcase the particular gimmicks we decided to handcuff ourselves to for that deck build.
This one was more about telling a story, telling the D&D classic story that you tell your buddies, hey, I went on this adventure with this land at this place with these are the monsters I fought. And I think this deck is totally on point. But like Z said, go down below and tell us what dungeon adventures you would put into this. What equipment would you put in it? Is there a land that you think is more D&D than the lands that we have out here?
And for what it's worth, the deck's not fully optimized. It was never going to be optimized.
No.
I do try to build with what cards I have in my collection. So, like I said, Sneak Attack would have been appropriate for the Rogue and super on flavor. I don't own a Sneak Attack. And I can't just drop the money on a Sneak Attack to make a video.
No.
So, rather than do y'all the disservice of listing a card, not having it, or doing something like proxying it, I wanted to do the best we could with what we have, which means there's always room for improvement. And with the next D&D set, or the next, I believe it's Commander Legends Battle for Waterdeep, or whatever they're calling it, we have another D&D set on the way. So maybe, just maybe, we'll do some kind of spotlight upgrading this deck to see where we wind up with it.
And maybe I'll build my D&D deck when that one comes out and have a D&D battle.
Yeah, that might be a fun thing we can do, is see if we can get a couple of D&D decks together and see how it goes out. But for now, I've been Z.
I've been Zed. Stay forever noob, guys. Stay safe, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.